I have a pretty brief presentation tonight. We're going to recap some of the conservation planning tenets that we talked about in the first week. I was gratified to see that Amy's NRCS specific conservation planning process had all the same steps, sometimes in slightly different order. You know, I'd say while there is a prescribed order that Amy described in the order that we're presenting, it's a little bit more free flowing. So hopefully Amy won't get upset with me if I say, you know, take what works for you, and remember that this is an iterative process, and it's gonna be fluid through time. So I'm going to talk about that tonight too. So I'm going to start with a PowerPoint presentation. And about halfway through, I'll switch over to a Google document that will be kind of your homework and hopefully a useful tool moving forward, and then back to the PowerPoint. So let's go. Oh, okay. Okay, is that showing up? Yes, I've got the thumbs up. Awesome. So I'm not going to monitor chat while I'm doing this. I'll ask Mike to monitor chat, and if there's any questions, go ahead and get them in the chat box there. And really my goal was to go kind of back through the conservation planning process, hit the high points, and leave a little bit of room and space for folks if you've got topics that you want to go over again or ask questions about. This is kind of the pulling it together piece. So this is a good time to have a little bit more dialogue before we transition into our panelists tonight. Oh, and this is my other funny joke. Apparently I'm on a roll because this is Conservation Planning 104th, because it's our 4th session, and tonight you're going to go forth and do good things on your land. So Conservation Planning 104th. Oh, there we go. So just a little reminder here that nothing happens without the strength of partners and partnership. This whole seminar series is made possible because of our project funders and partners. These are the same folks that you can rely on for technical and financial support through your conservation planning process and also your project implementation processes. So thanks to our partners and our funders. So in week 1, we talked about what a conservation plan is, and we talked about a few ways to think about making one for your land. We had that slide that was the wall of words that kind of walked you through that multi-step process that Amy had a much better graphic to talk about tonight. And as the weeks have progressed, we've talked about aquatic habitats, water cycles, water cycling, and we've learned about soils, plants, and trees. These are all opportunities for you to stop me and for us to have questions or conversation as you go along. And we've had folks talk about best practices and considerations for woodlands, for agricultural lands, streamside and aquatic habitat, and a little bit about yards as well, and bats and beavers. And we talked about creating a vision. So starting where you are now, and hopefully you've had some time to think about what your vision for your property is and how you'll make plans for your property to get closer to that vision over time. Remember, we talked about writing down, like pencil and paper, your vision statement using current tense and active voice. And as you start building out your goals and objectives to work toward your vision, you're keeping in mind the 3 elements for conservation planning. The environmental considerations, economic opportunities, and possibly limitations, and social context. Maybe you've taken some time to walk your property with a fresh eye, mapping out your resources, your existing conditions, your challenges and opportunities. Maybe you had some surprises or got some of your assumptions kind of checked. But hopefully you have a good idea of your current state. Hopefully you've also been able to access maps or mapping resources to get a different perspective on your land and how it fits into the larger landscape. So you might be thinking now about how the surrounding area impacts or shapes your property, or how some of your proposed work might impact the surrounding area. And I've heard a couple people talk about looking at the LiDAR coverage and seeing how, you know, things that they observe on the land, like, oh, this part of my land is really protected, this part of my land always stays wet, and being able to look at the hill shade and some of the mapping resources to help explain that a little bit. I'm getting a message from Mike that my audio is really low. I don't know why. I haven't changed anything, but I'll just get closer and talk a little louder. So along the way, we've talked about the way that reality sometimes has a way of poking its head in, and the more proactive you can be about thinking ahead on some of the potential roadblocks and challenges, the better able you'll be to be able to plan and pivot and address things as they come up. I see Lee has a question in the chat. I was monitoring it. Where can we look up LiDAR? So there's a couple of websites where you can look at LiDAR maps and LiDAR coverage. And some of those resources are available in the portal on our website. And I think Mike is going to drop a link into the chat as well for one of the friendlier LiDAR sites out there.
Yes, indeed.
Awesome. And I'll pause here. Any other questions? I remember one of the things that came up in our earlier session, folks were curious about water rights. So Mike has dropped that website in the chat for looking at LiDAR. So one of the questions was about water rights and also about how you learn more about what kind of legal restrictions or legal requirements that you have. And, you know, I'll tell you folks, the stuff can get complicated fast. And there are different agencies and different organizations that have different jurisdictions depending on where you are and what you want to do. So, and none of us that I know of have like all of the permitting and all of the legal stuff on the top of our heads, because that would just take up all the space. So my best advice for dealing with questions about water rights or legal rights or responsibilities or obligations or permitting questions is to start with the organization or the agency that you're working with. So say you're going to work through NRCS, you're going to talk to Amy about, you know, what she knows, and as you get further in, if you're going to talk with the Watershed Council, and they're going to remind you that you need to get in touch with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And so again, this is going to be kind of an iterative process. It would be cool if there was a place that you could go that kind of crosswalked all of the all of the different requirements, but it's so site specific that unfortunately that resource doesn't exist. So back to LiDAR real quickly, Mike is reminding you that you can find your property by zooming in on the map. And then what we talked about, one really nice way to work with that data from there is to take a screenshot. And that way you don't have to worry about trying to download the LiDAR data and find a program to project it on your computer. It's a screenshot. You'll be able to zoom in on that. And so that's a nice way to work with that LiDAR information. There we go. Okay, so back to reviewing our conservation planning process. These are the first few steps of building a conservation plan. We've talked about some of these in our classes so far. And although this is our last evening together, this is definitely not the end of our conversation or availability for folks that are here in this workshop series. If you are in our service area, we want to be your first call. We'll probably tell you to call Amy, but call us first and we'll help you figure out what your next steps can be. And if you're outside our service area, if you're in a different watershed, if you're in a different county, we're happy to help connect you with resources that are kind of our parallel or corollaries in your area. The most important thing that I want to present here is that there are people who can help. There are people whose job it is to help, and their job is to connect landowners with resources. So make the most of that. So the steps on this slide might be the next steps for some folks, and we've included a worksheet as part of your homework to help you prioritize prospective actions and prospective projects. And it asks you to think about things like your interest level in a particular project, availability of funding, the scope of the proposed project, any potential benefit, and relative cost, among other things. And what I think is really cool about this worksheet is that you can use it in a few different ways. You can use it to look at an individual project and kind of gauge your readiness and the project's readiness to put on the ground. And it can also help you evaluate between several projects and help you prioritize what steps to take next. So I'm gonna back out of the PowerPoint and switch over to the worksheet. Okay, excuse me. So can you see this worksheet here? It says project prioritization worksheet.
Yes, we can see it. You might want to just zoom in a little bit.
No
with
problem.
That percentage.
Zoom in. Hang on. Better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. So again, this is a tool that you can use either if you've got a project in mind or if you've got a few different projects and you're trying to decide which way to go next. And so for each of these questions, there's kind of a high, medium, and low readiness factor. And we suggest assigning points on a 1-point scale. And then when you get down to the bottom, when you're thinking about financial feasibility, technical ease, your interest, the kind of support that's available funding-wise, the kind of support that's available with technical assistance, chances for success. What are the odds that this is going to be a successful project and it's going to result in uplift? Okay, and then what's the input? So besides the financial and the technical input, what's the energetic input? How much of your own time and energy are you going to be required to put into this? And do you have that time and energy to give? And then finally, it asks you to think about, with this project, maybe you've got the capacity to put this project on the ground, implement it right now, but over the long term, this is going to be a project that requires maintenance. Are you prepared to do that maintenance? Do you have a plan for that maintenance? Is maintenance something that you want to go seek funding and support for? And so this kind of covers the lifespan of a project. And then at the bottom, if you follow the 1 to 3 point application, the higher the score that your project comes out with, the better readiness or ripeness that the project has. So this project, or this prioritization worksheet is on the website portal. I can go ahead and drop a link into the chat for now. And there may be issues with permission, so that may not be the way that you want to try to access this. So if you can't access it, please know that this is available on the website portal, okay? So questions or thoughts about using this as a tool? I think it can be pretty useful, and the more I think about using this tool, the more utility it seems to have. And again, this is kind of a blueprint for ways to think about prioritizing projects and implementation. This certainly isn't the only way, and these certainly aren't the only questions that you can ask when you're thinking about project prioritization. And if there aren't any questions, then I'm going to scoot back over to the PowerPoint. Okay. Awesome. Let's go. This is the most complex I've gotten in Zoom, and so far so good. I think this is great. Okay, we're back to the PowerPoint, right? Okay, and we're going to go slideshow. And we're going to go from current slide. This is great. Okay. So I mentioned this earlier before we started diving into this PowerPoint. Your conservation plan is a living document. So what does that mean? That means that your plan is going to change over time, and it means it should change over time. Having that vision is really important, and it's really valuable. And that's really your driver in this conservation planning process, right? But as you go along, you may learn new information, your priorities might shift, your resources might change. There are a lot of things that can come up over the lifespan of a conservation plan that can cause you to shift your plan or to refocus on different elements of your plan. And so something that we like to recommend when we're talking about like maybe a 5 to 10 year planning timeline. And that's not hard and fast. That's not cast in stone in any way. But the idea here is to be thinking long term. And we talked about this really early on. When we think about conservation and implementation, conservation practices, we're not necessarily really focused on all the time putting projects on the ground and expecting them to remain static. In the case of something like fencing, we probably do want it to stay fairly static. But in the case of riparian restoration or plantings, those things are going to grow and they're going to change. And so thinking about your conservation plan on a bit longer timeline allows you some flexibility to shift and be responsive to what your land's response is to your practices. So plan for regular check-ins along the way. That might be seasonal. So maybe, you know, every quarter you pick a time to check on your plan, review it, see what you've accomplished. And this is another reason to write down that vision statement, revisit that vision statement. Does that still resonate with you? Another kind of catalyzing event might be funding availability. So if you see something on the council's website that says, hey, we've got this grant solicitation going on, and you're like, oh, I've been holding off on this one aspect of my conservation plan because I need this, this lump sum of funding, this might be the time to go back, look at your conservation plan, connect with the Watershed Council, and see how that's all going to fit together for you. And then as you're planning out in that 5 to 10 year timeline, be thinking about what you can do now and what you can schedule, and start creating those discrete objectives to get at goals and benchmarks along the way. And just keep in mind that everything you do today is an investment in the future, with or without the extra D after the exclamation mark. Okay, and then this is really, this is important to me because I'm a data nerd, but do things now that you can do over time and measure change on your property. And so I've got a couple of examples here. Photo points are a really great way to look at the landscape over time. I don't know about you, but I sometimes think that I'm going to remember things over time and I don't need to write them down or, make notes of them. And then I'll go back and try to remember something and it's gone. And photo points are a really great way to really memorialize what's happening on the ground as you take action. So on the bottom part of the slide, you see a series of 4 blocks, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. So this is plantings along a waterway, and the green arrow is pointing out that tree that's the benchmark for the photo point. So every year, whoever's taking this photo for this photo point is going to go to the same place where they can see the same tree, so they're getting relatively the same aspect on their photo point. Quick, easy, really effective way to look at change over time. And you can do something similar with thermometers. If you've got a creek or a stream on your property, get yourself a thermometer, get some cable and cable it to a brick. Mike has an excellent protocol for deploying temperature loggers or thermometers in streams. He can help you out with that. And monitor temperature over time. And this can be as your as your water cycling changes and as your riparian vegetation grows up, maybe you're getting more shade and your temperature changes and hopefully decreases over time. Document observations. So one thing that that's really kind of fun and effective over time, start making a list of the birds that you see on your property. It's a great opportunity to learn something new if you aren't familiar with bird species. So keep track of your birds and make a quick note as to when you see them and where you see them. And that kind of information over time can really describe big patterns. So that kind of information is really fun. And then the cool trail camera stuff. Putting trail cameras up, especially to capture wildlife activity or wildlife encounters, they're not expensive, they're not cheap, but they're not expensive, and you can put them up and see who else is using your land when you're not there to watch. And so I'm hearing from Yvonne that my vocal has dropped again. I'm really sorry, folks. I'm not sure what's happening there. So I'll get close and get loud. In the bottom right-hand corner, there's a trail cam still of a bobcat, which is a pretty cool find. And then when I was looking for trail camera, okay, now I'm loud again. When I was looking for trail camera images, I found this really neat camera still in the upper right-hand corner of turkey vultures. And these are at a stream in the Coast Range in Oregon. And turkey vultures are not something that we necessarily think of using coastal stream systems. And so these are just kind of some of the unexpected things that you can find and keep track of with trail cameras. So celebrate your successes on the land and capture your lessons learned. All right, so just a quick reference for the types of projects that you might consider on your landscape. This Oregon Bee project poster up in the upper left-hand side talks about why it's important to think about pollinators and incorporate species that are pollinator friendly no matter where you're doing work, because pollinators are everywhere and they need our help. We've got a great riparian fencing project over here. This is Soltow on Hamilton Creek. So this is helping to protect Hamilton Creek and the banks on Hamilton Creek, and to protect the plantings along there. That's gonna help address any erosion concerns. It's gonna help address in-stream habitat over the long term, and it's gonna help address water temperatures, water quality, water quantity. And then in the very bottom, this is our neat culvert replacement on Ferguson Creek down in the Longtown watershed, so down outside of Eugene there. And I know Yvonne talked about having a culvert situation in Lane County, and I know culverts are a pretty common thing that that councils get involved in. And so on the left-hand side, you've got this perched culvert, not fish passage friendly, and also at risk of failure over time. So the council went in, pulled that culvert out, and then did, this is, okay, so it's a stream simulation pipe arch culvert. So it's still a culvert, it's not a full bridge, but the way they've approached the crossing and the culvert replacement is to make it creek-like inside the culvert. The culvert is appropriately sized for the basin, and then they redid the road surfacing on the top as well. So just lots and lots of potential projects on the ground. We're going to hear from some of these folks tonight. So these are potential sources of funding and also technical support and assistance. Look how similar this page is to our sponsors and partners page. Because we all work together, and that's how these projects are successful. And the strength of the work that we can do on the ground is directly related to the strength of our partnerships. And that is it. You get the sugar cookie rock picture one last time. And contact information. I know that you've got Mike's email address, you've got my email address. You've got our website here and phone numbers. Reach out to us, whether you're in our service area or not. If you're in our service area, we'll help you connect with the local resources. And if you're outside of our service area, we will help you connect with the folks that you need to in your area.